Hello students, I'm recording this video lecture so that we can maximize whatever time we have in the conduct of our classes. The connectivity has been a challenge to most of us, especially due to the inclement weather. Although the weather has improved, I would still like to try and explore this avenue because I have in mind students who have difficulty joining Zoom and they might miss out on the lectures since we meet only once a week. So I think it's very important for us to be able to revisit lessons conducted, especially if a class is only held once a week. We do have live Zoom classes for orals wherein you recite and then you give back what you have learned. But for lectures, I think the most efficient way to be able to do this is to record it so that you can visit the video every now and then and you can review or revise whenever you have time. And for those who are not able to join, then there will be no excuse for them to miss out on the lessons. So our subject for this video lecture is understanding the self. So we are now in the midterm part, and I would like to share with you a slide that we are going to discuss today. Okay, so this is our slide for this lecture. Let me just switch on the slideshow. So understanding the self from the perspective of psychology, that is our topic for today. Psychology is the field of the social sciences that deals with the description, explanation, prediction, and control of behavior. So psychology is known for anything that has to do with behavior, evolving into a science only in the late 19th century. From the discipline of philosophy, the field assumed the existence of the states of consciousness in human beings. Alam naman natin yung consciousness means awareness of something. Psychology further believes that the world of material things, including people, exists independently of the perceiving human mind. Ano yung sinasabing world of material things? That means anything that has form, anything that can be seen, that can be touched. These belong to the material, the world of material things. Okay, and it is stated here, including people. So we belong to that because we do have a body, we have a form, we can be touched. So including people exists independently. So we exist, we become, okay, and we are independent of the perceiving human mind, okay. The mind-body problem of philosophy is one issue in the field of knowledge. Another, specifically for psychology, is the famous nature-nurture controversy. Ano ba itong nature-nurture? We believe that an organism, example, a man, has certain traits because it is already imprinted in his or her DNA. And because of that, when that individual is born, then we call everything that is inherent in him. Sabihin no, nasa loob niya, kasama na pinanganak siya, sabihin built-in. Ito ay imprinted sa kanyang DNA, ay nature. Sabihin, nature niya. Ano ba mga bagay na nature? Physical attributes, nature yan. Yung occupational interest, kung ano yung mga hilig niya when it comes to certain things. Siguro there are certain strengths kasi ang family nila, known sila when it comes to a particular strength or a skill. Nature yon, inborn. Okay? Pero may tinatawag din na nurture. Ano yung nurture? Yung nurture naman, itong mga bagay na na-enhance dahil sa kanyang kapaligiran. For example, nature. Ang magulang niya ay matatalino. So, based on research, intelligence is inherited. So, we know that the child, pag pinanganak, mataas ang possibility na matalino din. Inherent. Kaya lang, kung siya naman ay lumaki sa isang pamilya na challenge siya financially, hindi siya nakakakain ng maayos, masustansyang pagkain, hindi naman siya naipadala sa magandang eskwelahan, hindi naman siya naturuan ng mga magagaling na teacher, yung mga kaibigan niya hindi naman maayos. So, itong inherent skills or traits na nasa kanya, hindi ito mama-maximize, hindi ito ma-optimize. Kasi yung paligid niya ay hindi enriched. On the other hand, palagi natin isang bata, average lang, sabi nung pangkaraniwan, ang kanyang intelligence, pangkaraniwan, average. Kaya lang dahil nga may kakayanan ng magulang na mag-provide ng kayang magbayad ng magagaling na teacher, kumakain talaga ng masusustansyang pagkain, binibigyan ng vitamins para sa brain, sinistimulate, may mga exercises. Ito ang tinatawag na nurture. So kahit na hindi siya ganun kagaling, kahit na siya ay average lang, na-maximize ang kanyang potential dahil siya ay napapaligiran ng enriched environment. Yan ang nature, nurture. Kaya may iba, di ba? Bakit ang personality? Ang ganda ng personality. Kasi malamang nurture yon. Kasi kinalakihan, lumaki siya sa isang environment na tinutukan nito, ano yung mga kailangan niya, pinunan. Pero yung mga tao naman na kahit na gaano naman kagaling, pero kung ito hindi inalagaan, ito ay hindi in-enhance, hindi ito na ma-maximize. So over the years, experts in the field of human behavior have sought for ways to best explain the causes of human behavior, only to discover that both nature and nurture influence behavior, each one to a greater or lesser degree. So ito man ay maging nature, magiging nurture man ito, meron pa rin itong impact at influence sa behavior ng isang tao. So connected to the study of human behavior is the concept of self. Psychologists for many generations have provided their own explanations of the self for want of a clearer, better understanding of the individual in particular and human behavior in general. So may mga studies tungkol dito. Okay? Kasi gusto talaga malaman ng tao, ano ba talaga ang, sino siya talaga? Meron ba siyang inherent strength? Anong mga weaknesses na maaring meron ang pangkaraniwan upang ito ay ma-enhance, mapalakas, o may mga bagay na hindi maganda upang ito ay maiwasan. Ang objective lamang ay ang tao magkaroon ng quality of life, maging mas maganda ang kanyang buhay, iiwasan niya ang pwede niyang maiwasan, di na niya ito kailangan danasin. Sa pag-aaral, ma-reach niya yung highest potential niya bilang isang individual. According to William James, who was an American philosopher and psychologist, we see here that William James was a professor of psychology at Harvard University and was known for being one of the great pragmatists. He's also known for his theory of the self. He wrote many articles on both philosophy and psychology. So marami siya sinulat na research. Okay, and one of which the Principles of Psychology in 1890. Tagal na, no? It is in the book where his theory of the self is explained. Sa kanyang book, meron siyang sinight na me at saka I. William James, in his studies of human thoughts, concluded that the thoughts have 5 characteristics. Alam niyo naman kung ano ibig sabihin ng characteristic, di ba? As I explained before, a characteristic is what makes that thing a thing. Kung wala siyang ganun, hindi natin siya matatawag na ganun. So yan ang ibig sabihin ng characteristic. Number 1, all human thoughts are owned by some personal self. Okay, so ang bawat tao may thoughts. Okay? At itong thoughts ay kanya. Meron siyang sarili niyang mga ideas. Meron siyang mga haka-haka sa kanyang isip. May mga pumapasok sa kanyang kaisipan na ideas or siguro memories. Pero bawat isa ay merong set na matatawag niyang kanya. Number 2, all thoughts are constantly changing or are never static. Kaya ang thoughts are free-flowing. At alam natin, as we age, we mature because of the things that surround us, our perceptions are improved, nababago ang ating pananaw sa ating sarili at sa mundo. Kung kaya't hindi ito yung nananatiling constant or the same, syempre. Dati, sabi nga ng mga anak ko, bakit parang yung ganyang kama dati parang ang laki-laking tingnan. Kaya pala kasi bata ako noon. Ngayon na malaki na ako, parang mukha na siyang maliit. Di ba? Kasi sa mata ng bata, lahat ng bagay malaki. Pero habang ikaw ay nagmamature, nakikita mo, hindi rin naman pala ganun kalaki. So, even thoughts are constantly changing, right? There is a continuity of thoughts as it focus shifts from one object to another. Bakit? Kasi first, napapansin mo ito lang. Later on, as it progresses, you notice more things, you see the bigger picture, which is why thoughts do not remain static. They grow, they change. Okay? So number 4, thoughts deal with the objects that are different from and independent of consciousness self. Yung mga thoughts kasi akala natin, yan ay mga bagay lamang na nakikita natin or ito yung mga bagay na aware tayo. Hindi. Actually, thoughts deal with what is independent of the consciousness itself. Kaya minsan may mga trauma, meron ka mga dreams, meron ka mga fears, meron ka mga phobia. These are thoughts without you realizing that an experience, a memory has triggered maybe a negative thought. Or meron din naman tayo mga biases, gusto natin ito, mas gusto natin yan. Kasi maaring ito ay connected sa isang happy memory or happy thought. Number 5, consciousness can focus on particular objects and not others. It could be na yung ating conscious level or level of consciousness would prefer certain things. Kaya meron din tayong mga biases, meron tayong prejudices. For example, ako in plants, I love Mayana. I love the Mayana plant. So even if you bring me to a garden with vast varieties of plants, my eyes would readily catch a Mayana in the group. Okay. So kasi nakafocus siya on a particular object. Kasi there are objects that are preferred. There are objects that are not preferred. Okay. So ganun ang self. Kung ano yung dominant sa kanya, predominant sa kanya, anong mahalaga sa kanya, anong pleasant sa kanya, yan ang mas nakikita niya. Yung mga bagay na hindi pleasant, trauma, ginagawa ng brain, itinatago yan, umahanap siya ng way upang takpan yon or laktawan. Bakit? Ayaw ng brain ng anything na unpleasant. Okay. So here, as mentioned in the list of thought characteristics above, thoughts are associated with the existence of the self. Kaya ka may thoughts kasi may self ka. Further, James believed that the self is made up of 2 parts, the me self and the I self. So according to James, hindi ito iisa. Okay, kahit na ikaw ay isang tao, meron kang me-self, meron kang I-self. The me-self can be considered as a separate object or individual that the person refers to when discussing or describing their personal experience. Okay, so ang me self ay ang self na nakaka-focus doon sa kanyang personal experience. For example, the gifts were sent to me. The person is smiling at me. Okay, so that's why we use the word me here. Kala ko nga, grammar lang ito. Yung pala talagang merong basihan nitong paggamit ng word na me. So ulitin natin, the me self can be considered as a separate object or individual that the person refers to when discussing or describing their personal experiences. So pag ginamit itong me, usually ito ay connected to a personal experience. The I, on the other hand, kasi meron kang me, ito naman meron kang I, is the self that knows and recognizes who they are and what they have done. So more of self-awareness. Ang self-awareness is I, and ability to do things, okay? And the things that the I is activities that the I is able to do and has done and will continue to do. For example, I borrowed the book from the library. So this is an action, okay? I won the game. So it shows the I and what the I is able to do, right? While yung me naman, experience. So tandaan na, me, according to James, me, experience, I, accomplishment. Right. James called the me as the empirical me and the I, self, the pure ego. So me is empirical, me. And another word for the I is the pure ego or the thinking self. Okay? So, experiencing me, thinking naman si I. The me self is further divided into three components. Material self, okay, yung form, the physical you. The social self, ibig sabihin sino ka sa harap ng ibang tao at sa iba-ibang sitwasyon. At yung spiritual self, anything that is outside of the conscious self. Okay? Something that is higher. So ito ang me self. So tatandaan, the me is divided into three. Material, which is your physical self. Social, ito yung relationships mo. Spiritual means your beliefs of a higher being or a higher authority or a belief in a God. Number one, the material self consists of the things or objects that belong to the person or entities that the person belongs to. Example of these are the person's body, material yan. Siyempre, may form ka, may katawan ka, yung family mo, anything that you call that you call yours. Okay, anything that you own and that you believe or you claim as your territory, your clothes, your books, your money, your thoughts, your dreams, materials. But here more of the something that has an object. The body is the core of the material self, and everything that is attached or associated to it identifies the person. For example, the style of clothes he wears, the types of books he reads, the culture of his family, and the amount of money that he has. Anything about himself is the material self. The more attached or identified the person is to material things, the more you will be affected if any of them changes. Kaya pala yung mga tao kapag may mga resistant to change, yung mga hindi maka-adapt sa change, hindi madaling magbago kasi nga pagka nabago lang yung kanilang environment, nabago yung kanilang paligid, hirap na sila na mag-adapt kasi mas malakas ang kanilang material self. Nakakonect ito sa mga bagay na sanay siyang pinaliligiran siya nito. For example, a death in the family or being a victim of fire would cause changes in the material self. Okay? The social self refers to who the person is in a particular social situation. Changes in behavior usually result from different social situations the person finds himself in. James believed that people have many social selves. O kasi iba ka pagkaharap ng family mo, iba ka pagkaharap mo yung friends mo, iba ka pagkasama mo yung mahal mo sa buhay, yung crush mo, yung boyfriend mo. Okay, may iba kang self na pinoproject because of the many social situations they find themselves in. For example, the person changes how he presents himself when he's at home. Siyempre, pag nasa bahay ka, anak ka. Or maaring magulang ka. Iba ang role nun. In school, you are a student. Or it can be a professor, a faculty. Okay, you could be, you could have colleagues as your friends. The person chooses the self that would smoothly adapt to the social situation in order for him to fit in. So by understanding and by being aware that there are certain social contexts na iba-iba, the self finds a way to come up with uh, uh, a projection of itself that would cover most of these situations. Sabihin yun, kaya mag-adapt sa iba-ibang situations. At nalalaman niya yun at nadidiscover niya yun habang na-experience ito. So experience is very important. The spiritual self refers to the self that is more concrete or permanent. Okay, so pag-aralan natin yan dati, nabanggit din yan ng mga philosophers before, na ito ay more concrete or permanent when compared to the material and social self. Kasi higher siya eh. So this self is the most subjective. Ano yung subjective? Kanya-kanya. Hindi pwedeng pare-pareho tayo or in general. Pag subjective, each one to his own. An intimate part of the self, it includes aspects like the individual's personality, values, morals that are usually stable and constant. The spiritual self is always engaging in the process of introspection. Lagi nag-iisip, lagi nagsi-self-check, lagi nagsi-self-observe. Okay? Introspection. Intro means within. Okay, to inspect, is to analyze, to check. This is a method that includes reflecting or looking inward to study and understand how and why of the self. According to James, this looking inward is more important than satisfying the needs of either the material or the social self. If there's conflict in the spiritual self, then it will be very difficult for the person to have peace of mind. Bakit? Above ito ng material eh. So this is of a higher plane, higher consciousness. The I self is what William James called the pure ego. The pure ego is similar to the person's soul or mind. Since this considered to be a non-substance, the I self cannot be studied objectively. So, ganun ulit, subjective na naman siya. One or each one to his own. The pure ego comprises the totality of person's identity. So, yan siya, kung sino siya talaga. Yan ang pure ego. It takes into account the past, the present, future selves of the individual. Minomold ka niyo nakaraan, ang present situation at maaring mga naiisip mo for yourself in the future. This perception, ibig sabihin ng perception, pananaw mo of identity arises from a continuous stream of human consciousness. Other selves in psychology, so ibig sabihin, isang tao ka lang, pero ang paniwala ng psychology within you, there are other selves. So the field of psychology is rich in concepts and ideas about human behavior. So the concept that self has been studied quite extensively. So hindi nawawala yung topic na yan. As such, psychologists and other scientists in the social sciences presented their versions and ideas about the self. So you have the global and differentiated self model. So merong global self, merong differentiated self. Anong global self represents the overall value that a person places upon himself. Kung anong tingin mo sa sarili mo, kung anong pananaw mo sa sarili mo, yan ang iyong global self. This affects how he views and feels about himself. May mga taong gwapo-gwapo na pero tingin niya sa sarili niya ang pangit. Hindi siya worthy. Okay? Parang laging may kulang. Magtataka yung iba, bakit? Ang ganda-ganda naman niya, ang gwapo-gwapo naman niya, but tingin niya sa sarili niya napakababa. May ganun eh. The groups of people that he interacts with every day of his life strongly influence him. Siyempre, kung napapaligiran ka ng mga tao nagmamahal sa'yo at lagi nagsasabi na mahal ka nila, ikaw ay magaling, ikaw ay maganda, ikaw ay malakas, di yan ang magiging pananaw mo. Pero kung ikaw naman ay napapaligiran ng mga taong sinasabi na ikaw walang kwenta, hindi ka maayos, masisira ang buhay mo, later on, eventually, ito ay, dahil lagi mo ito naririnig, ito ay nabubuo mo na rin sa iyong sarili hanggang sa ito ay napapaniwalaan mo na rin. So his global self is the product of all experiences that he had in society, which accounts for the kind of person he presently is. So he gets feedback from others, and what feedback he gets, he accepts as his identity. That's a global self. According to Murray Bowen, who was an American psychiatrist and professor, he was among those who developed the family systemic therapy. In his observation of the family, he came up with a concept of a differentiated self. In his theory, he observed that there are two forces affecting the person. The first is togetherness, and the second is individuality. A balance should be maintained between these two forces. For too much togetherness creates friction and conflict and prevents the development of the person's sense of self. Too much individuality, on the other hand, results in distant and estranged feelings towards family. So, ang sinasabi lang dito is, merong two sides. Okay, observation usually that a person entertains or a person experiences their differentiated self, and then you have individuality. Togetherness and individuality is mentioned here. Okay, so sabi nito, kailangan meron kang balance when it comes to these things. Okay, because pagka too much daw ang togetherness, syempre, mas madalas ang pagtatalo. Like yung magkasama eh. Okay? Or the closer you become, then you're more open to each other. Then you are most likely more, you are more susceptible or to friction, sabihin yung pagtatalo, hindi pagkakaintindihan. Okay? So, friction and conflict and prevents the development of person's sense of self. Okay? And too much individuality naman, mahirap na masyadong independent. Okay? Ikaw lang, iniisip mo lang ang sarili mo. So, may feeling mo para kang OP, out of place, feeling mo hindi ka kasama, or ikaw mismo, dinesisyonan mo na ayaw mong makisama, gusto mo ikaw lang, nagtatrabaho, ikaw lang ang gumagawa ng mga bagay-bagay. Pero tandaan mo, no man is an island. Okay? So a differentiated self, though still affected by the presence of others, has the ability to separate feelings and thoughts. So independent, the differentiated self could be more rational, more cognitive, kasi naihiwalay niya yung kanyang thoughts, naihiwalay niya yung kanyang feelings. The person recognizes that he has his own personality. Siyempre, unique ka. And therefore endowed with unique characteristics not found in other members of the group. So okay lang yun, gusto mo maging unique, gusto mo maging special, may signature, gusto mo mag-stand out ka. Yun naman talaga ang dapat. Okay, yun ang sinasabi dito. Okay, because you have unique characteristics. So wala naman talagang alike. By differentiating from unwanted influences in people and environment, he can be who he truly is rather than take on the identity that is prescribed by family or society. So, by differentiating from unwanted influences. Sabihin nun, medyo dumidistansya ka, he can be who he truly is. Bakit naaalagaan mo yung self mo? Hindi ito parang dahan-dahan na nauupos na parang kandila dahil sa negativity ng mga tao towards you. Magsa-thrive ka kung ito ay kung meron kang certain level din naman of individuality. The differentiated self enables a person to develop and sustain his unique identity. Make his own choices. O dapat marunong na. Hindi yung lahat na lang tinatanong. Maliligo ba ako? Ma, maliligo ba ako? Tututbrush ba ako? Ma, pahawakan ko ba to? Hindi yan healthy. Okay? You have to learn to make your own choices, accept responsibility behavior. Hindi yung, siya kasi may kasalanan o panahon, umuulan kasi, lahat na lang, may kasalanan, lahat na lang dapat sisihin, maliban sa'yo. Okay, so that's not good. And still be able to stay emotionally connected with family and friends. Dapat balance lahat. So you can have time to be you, individuality, but you have to recognize that there should be time when it comes to connection with others. So real and ideal concepts. You have Carl Rogers, person-centered theory, okay, wherein he mentioned there are two types of self, the real self-concept and the ideal self-concept. Ito na yung expectation versus reality, or reality versus expectation. So ideal self is the expectation. Reality, syempre, yung real you. So the real self-concept refers to all information, perception of the person about himself. That's a real self-concept. Okay, ikaw, meron ka sariling pananaw sa iyong sarili. So this is who he actually is and answers the question, who am I? Pag tinanong, who am I? Sino ka ba talaga? Okay? Pag nasagot mo yung tanong na yan, yan ang iyong real self-concept. The ideal self-concept is the model version of the person has of himself. Ito yung mga pangarap sa sarili mo, ito yung mga nais mo, ito yung mga gusto mong i-target, yan ang gusto mong maging. Okay. So this idealized view was born out of experience, standards, and demands of society, and the heroes and models which you choose to imitate. Okay, kaya iba, people would always look for a hero. Bakit? They want someone to imitate. Lalo na pag ang buhay nila ay mahirap, maraming challenges. For them to keep on going, they have to have a hero, okay, to look up to. So in short, the ideal self is what the person aims for himself to be. It answers the question of who he wants to be or who do I want to be. Carl Rogers stated that there should be congruence, sameness, equality between the real self and the ideal self. In order for the person to be happy, dapat ito daw ay magkasundo. Ito nagtatalo. Okay, yung ideal self mo at yung real self. If the real self is very different from the ideal self, then the person will experience dissatisfaction. Siyempre, hindi ka masaya. And may see himself as a failure or loser. Kasi meron kang gusto, hindi mo naman ito na-meet. Okay. So the self-discrepancy theory of Higgins stated that people use internalized standards. Sabihin nun, ikaw gumagawa ng sarili mo standard, may sarili kang checklist para sa sarili mo, to which they compare themselves. So, kino-compare niya yung sarili niya sa iba dahil meron siyang checklist at doon niya nakikita kung siya ay higit o may kulang sa kanya. When the self is found to be deviating, diverting from these guides, the result is self-discrepancy. So nakikita ang difference nun. So self-discrepancy may cause emotional discomfort. Siyempre, ayaw mo na ng self-discrepancy. Gusto mo kung ano yung expectation mo, ganun talaga ang real na ikaw. Kaya lang minsan hindi naman laging nangyayari kasi yun. Alright? And because of this, the self goes through a process of discomfort and goes through a process of feeling niya incompetent siya or feeling niya he does not have enough, and there is guilt and worse, indifference. Multiple unified selves, meron multiple selves theory, at meron dito yung unified self. Okay. So we have true and false selves. Dito diniscuss ni Winnicott kung ano yung true and false selves. Ang true self daw is when the self is seen as creative, spontaneous, experiencing each day their lives, appreciating being alive, real, integrated. So ito yung reality. The true self is the individual who recognizes his strength. O, alam mo ba ang strength mo? Alam ba limitation mo? Alam ba kung hanggang saan ka lang? Ano yung mga kinakatakot mo? Alam mo ba yung pakiramdam ng success? Alam mo bang kaya mo itong ma-achieve? Okay? A false self may be manifested as a form of defense. It lacks spontaneity, is dead and empty, and is masked and hides. Okay. And hides the true person for fear of the pain for rejection. And the slides will define all these terms. Okay, so you have here a slide on proactive and agentic. Agentic, okay, from the word human agency. Proactive means you create the situation, you do not just merely respond to situations. May gusto ka, gumagawa ka ng paraan upang ito ay mangyari at ito ay magampanan mo. So in this theory, the basic principle involves human learning. Okay, may binanggit dito na modeling. Sabihin no, nakikita mo paano gawin, meron nagpapakita sa iyo kung paano. Okay, yung mga walang tatay, pag sila nag-asawa, hirap na hirap silang maging tatay sa kanilang mga anak. Bakit? Walang modeling, kulang ng modeling. Hindi naman nila nakita ito. Okay? So human nature is described by Bandura is plastic and flexible. Okay, so here you have social cognitive theory. Please read through this as we discuss this further, because I think this is too much to absorb for one lesson. Okay, so I want you to go over the slides as we prepare for certain quizzes in the days to come. All right, so I hope you have learned something. Review, go over the slides again, and then once we have the live Zoom, then we can discuss all of these. Have a nice day.